Marcus stopped because the phone kept ringing. Not police, not help, just a glowing screen beside a white woman bleeding in a roadside ditch. He knew the risk before he knelt down. A black man, night road, an unconscious girl who wasn't his. If he walked away, she would die. If he stayed, his life could be destroyed. So he lifted her anyway. What Marcus didn't know was that powerful eyes were already moving, and the man who would later accuse him believed this poor black father had no right to survive what came next. Stay with this story, because what happens next will force a question most people avoid. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Marcus's place? Marcus moved through his days with routine discipline, the kind built when mistakes cost more than pride. He fixed engines all morning, cleaned grease from his hands, then hurried home before dark because Ethan waited for him every night. Being late wasn't an option. Being careless wasn't either. Life didn't forgive black men who slipped. Money stayed tight. Work stayed uncertain. The shop ran on favors, shortcuts, and silence. Marcus had learned early when to speak and when to keep his head down, especially under Greg Thompson, whose smile vanished the moment rules got inconvenient. Integrity had a price, and Marcus felt it every time his paycheck came up short. Home was small, but it was controlled. Ethan's homework stayed taped to the fridge. Dinner was simple, but eaten together. Marcus made sure his son slept, believing the world could still be decent if you worked hard enough. That belief mattered. It was the only inheritance he could afford to pass on. Then there was the girl on his couch. Emily lay still beneath an old blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. Marcus didn't know her story. He didn't know she was Emily Catherine Whitmore, or that her last name opened doors he'd never be allowed near. All he knew was that leaving her alone felt wrong, and keeping her felt dangerous. Every sound outside carried weight. Sirens in the distance. Tires slowing too long. Looks from neighbors that lingered a second past curiosity. Marcus felt the environment shift around him like the rules had quietly changed without notice. Systems didn't need uniforms to feel threatening. They showed up as paperwork, as policies, as just following procedure. He'd seen it before: cold desks, clipped voices, people like Linda Harper deciding who deserved help and who deserved delays. Help never moved fast when it came to people like him. Somewhere far from that apartment, decisions were already forming. Men with clean shoes and confident voices moved pieces without ever touching the ground Marcus stood on. Andrew Collins was used to control. Charles Whitmore was used to outcomes. Neither expected resistance from a poor black father who fixed cars for a living. Marcus didn't know any of that yet. He only knew one thing. The night he chose not to walk away wasn't finished with him. And it wasn't going to end quietly. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, quiet and calculated, slipping into Marcus's life through pauses, looks, and delays that were easy to deny but impossible to ignore. By the third morning, he could feel it pressing against his chest every time he stepped outside. At the shop, the workbench felt colder than usual. Greg Thompson didn't raise his voice or cause a scene. He didn't have to. He leaned against the office door and watched Marcus work, measuring every movement with the comfort of someone who knew leverage when he saw it. "You've got problems bringing heat into my shop." The message was clear. Whatever was following Marcus home would not be tolerated here. Hours were cut. Jobs reassigned. By the end of the day, Marcus Reed understood he was being pushed out without anyone needing to say why. At home, the air stayed tight. Emily rested on the couch, her breathing steadier now, but her fear sharpening. Marcus avoided using her full name, avoided asking questions that would anchor danger more firmly inside his walls. Still, he couldn't miss the way she flinched at passing headlights. Emily Catherine Whitmore knew more than she was saying, and whatever she was running from had teeth. Ethan stayed close to his father, quieter than usual. He watched adults the way children do when they sense rules changing without explanation. Marcus caught himself listening harder for footsteps in the hall, for voices that didn't belong. He hated that his son was learning this version of the world so young. Ethan Reed deserved better than fear disguised as normal. The first call came in the afternoon, wrapped in professional calm. Linda Harper spoke slowly, carefully, as if kindness were built into the tone rather than the intent. "This environment isn't safe for a child." The words landed harder than any threat. The focus wasn't the injured woman anymore. It was Ethan. It was custody. It was the unspoken understanding that systems didn't need proof, only permission. Marcus tried to respond with facts: stability, employment, routine. But facts dissolved under implication. Every sentence Linda offered carried the same weight: cooperate or lose what mattered most. That night, Emily's voice cut through the quiet. He's going to take your son. She didn't explain who. She didn't need to. Power had a pattern, and she recognized it well enough to know where this was headed. Somewhere far above Marcus's ceiling, decisions were being reviewed with clean hands and confident posture. Charles Whitmore absorbed reports that reduced the situation to risk management. His concern didn't sound like anger. It sounded like inevitability. Problems were meant to be contained, and containment required compliance. The man tasked with ensuring that compliance didn't waste time. Andrew Collins entered the picture like he belonged there, his presence smooth and unhurried. He didn't introduce himself loudly or make demands immediately. He waited until Marcus felt cornered enough to listen. Cooperate, and this ends quietly. Quietly meant Ethan stayed home. Quietly meant no investigations. Quietly meant Marcus accepted whatever version of events was handed to him. The neighbors noticed more activity in the hallway but said nothing. Doors closed. Curtains shifted. Silence did its work the way it always did, protecting those with nothing to lose. Late that evening, two men appeared near the stairwell, close enough to block light, far enough to deny intent. They didn't touch Marcus. They didn't raise their voices. Next step, we involve child services. That was the moment the injustice sharpened into something unmistakable. The threat wasn't hidden anymore. It stood between Marcus and his son, confident that fear would finish the job. Marcus Reed felt it then, the deliberate cruelty of a system that didn't need chains when paperwork worked just as well. His integrity had already cost him work. Now it was being used to question his right to be a father. Inside the apartment, Emily listened, knowing the kind of power that spoke through others. Somewhere behind all of it, Andrew Collins kept moving pieces while Charles Whitmore waited for results. And every step forward made one thing clear. This wasn't about protection. It was about control. The trap was set. The pressure was no longer subtle. And the next move would decide whether Marcus lost everything or forced the truth into the open. The knock came without warning, heavy enough to rattle the doorframe. Marcus didn't rush. He steadied his breath first, the way he did before tightening a bolt that couldn't afford to slip. The hallway felt narrower when he opened the door, bodies filling the space with confidence that didn't belong there. Andrew stood closest, posture relaxed, eyes already scanning past Marcus and into the apartment. Control came naturally to him. Papers rested against his forearm, neat and official, the kind that didn't need to be read to be understood. Behind him, silence pressed forward, neighbors pretending not to watch, systems pretending not to threaten. "This ends tonight," Andrew said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Linda stood just behind him, expression calm, professional, already prepared to frame whatever followed as procedure. Marcus felt Ethan's presence behind his legs, small fingers gripping fabric, sensing danger without words. That grip hardened something inside him. Linda stepped forward, voice measured, rehearsed. "We're here for the child," she said. The sentence landed like a verdict, not an accusation, worse, an assumption. The implication that fatherhood was conditional, temporary, subject to review. Marcus Reed didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He knelt slightly, just enough for Ethan to see his face, just enough to promise without speaking. Behind them, movement stirred on the couch. Emily pushed herself upright, pale but focused, eyes locking onto Andrew with recognition sharp enough to cut through the room. The fear she'd carried for days didn't disappear. It narrowed. Andrew noticed her then. For the first time, his confidence hesitated. "Not much, just enough." "You shouldn't be here," he said. Emily stood anyway, leaning on the back of the couch, breath shallow but steady. The room felt different now, like something fragile had cracked. Linda shifted her stance, attention flicking between Marcus and the woman she'd dismissed as irrelevant. Emily's voice didn't shake. "Call him," she said. The words changed everything. Andrew's jaw tightened. He didn't ask who. He knew. Seconds stretched. Pressure mounted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Andrew made the call with a hand that no longer looked relaxed. When the voice answered on the other end, the temperature in the room dropped. Minutes later, another car arrived. This one didn't linger. Charles Whitmore stepped inside without ceremony, eyes moving quickly, calculating damage before greeting people. When he saw Emily standing, alive, his certainty fractured. Not concern. Control slipping always showed itself first as anger. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," Charles said. That was the moment the balance tipped. Not all at once, but enough. Emily took a step forward, the room bending toward her in a way Marcus had never experienced. Her voice carried something Andrew's never had, authority without permission. "You sent people after me," Emily said. Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it. Linda looked down at the papers in her hands like they might offer cover. They didn't. Systems collapse fastest when exposed to witnesses who weren't supposed to exist. Emily continued, each word steady. "You threatened his son to control me." The accusation hung in the air, undeniable now that it had a name. Charles looked at Andrew, then at Linda, realizing too late how much had been done in his name. His posture shifted, confidence draining into calculation, then into fear. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth had stepped forward on its own. Andrew's voice cracked when he tried to recover. "This can still be managed," he said. No one answered him. Phones were out now, not just one, several. The hallway murmured with movement, neighbors finally choosing sides. Linda Harper backed away a step, the authority she carried thinning under scrutiny. For the first time, paperwork wasn't enough. Emily stood beside Marcus, not behind him. Charles Whitmore saw it then. Not a rescuer he could dismiss, not a man he could intimidate, but a father who hadn't bent when it mattered most. The room had changed owners. Andrew's confidence collapsed into something smaller, brittle. Control wasn't returning. It couldn't. Too many eyes. Too much truth. Marcus felt Ethan's grip loosen, just slightly, enough to breathe. As Charles turned away, forced into damage control he could no longer direct, one thing was clear. The system had overreached, and the cost of that mistake was only beginning to surface. The aftermath did not unfold quietly, and it could not be buried. Within days, consequences arrived with names, dates, and signatures. Andrew Collins disappeared from the picture first, not with an apology, but with charges that carried weight no influence could dissolve. The threats he issued became evidence. The leverage he used against the child became the very reason he lost everything he tried to control. There was no negotiation, no soft landing. Charles Whitmore faced a reckoning he had spent a lifetime avoiding. His power did not vanish, but it fractured. Deals stalled. Investigations followed. Doors that once opened automatically began to close with questions attached. For the first time, his authority was forced to answer for the damage it enabled. Reputation could not outrun truth when witnesses refused silence. Linda Harper's paperwork failed her. Procedures meant to intimidate became proof of abuse. Her role was documented, reviewed, and stripped of protection. Systems only feel permanent until someone survives them long enough to expose their cracks. For Marcus, validation didn't arrive as praise. It arrived as permanence. Ethan stayed home. No knock came back to that door. No voice questioned his right to be a father again. Marcus Reed didn't gain power, but he kept his dignity, and that mattered more than any settlement ever could. Emily stood beside him when the dust settled, not as someone rescued, but as someone accountable. She didn't return to the world that tried to cage her without consequences. Emily Catherine Whitmore spoke publicly, naming what had been done, who had done it, and who had looked away. Silence lost its shield the moment she refused it. Nothing about the outcome was gentle. Pain didn't disappear. Fear didn't magically leave. But something irreversible happened. Truth moved from private suffering into public record. And once that line was crossed, there was no erasing it. Marcus watched his son sleep that night with the kind of stillness that only comes after surviving something meant to break you. Ethan Reed didn't know every detail, but he knew his father stood when it counted. That lesson would last longer than fear ever could. This wasn't a story about luck. It was about what happens when racism overreaches, when power assumes silence, when systems forget that the people they pressure are still watching. So ask yourself, when injustice is quiet, procedural, and disguised as policy, who is it really meant to protect? If this story hit you hard, don't scroll past it. Share your thoughts in the comments and ask yourself what silence costs when it's your turn to choose. Subscribe to Black Community Struggles for stories that refuse to stay quiet.